Hello, this video is for Chapter 2 of our ethics book, and in this video we're going to be evaluating relativism. This is part 1 of 2 parts of evaluating relativism. Okay, here's an argument for popular relativism. The first premise: different societies exhibit differences in particular moral beliefs and practices. All right. The moral standard that holds for a society is determined by the moral beliefs and practices most widely accepted in that society. All right. Now this leads to the conclusion, so different moral standards hold for different societies, or that relativism is true. So different societies exhibit differences in particular moral beliefs and practices. The moral standards that hold for a society is determined by the moral belief and practices most widely accepted in that society. So, different moral standards hold for different societies, or relativism is true. Okay. Now, in order to see if this argument stands, we're going to assess each of the premises. We'll begin by assessing the first premise. Different societies exhibit differences in particular moral beliefs and practices. So, accepting different descriptive claims of how the world is can lead to very different moral conclusions about what's right, even when we start with the same principles. Okay? So, the example that's talked about in the book about the Chelicians and the Greeks and their views on death. So the Chelicians eat a little piece of the dead bodies of people who die in their culture, whereas the Greeks burn people in funeral pyres. Now, each of the societies thought that the other one was completely incorrect, and how could they do that? And so you might think that this follows from a difference in moral principles. However, at least according to the view presented in the reading, we may not have to look at it this way. So it turns out that the practices of the Chelicians and the Greeks followed from their particular beliefs. However, they both thought that what they were trying to do is to properly respect the dead. So, it turns out that the Chelicians and the Greeks, in fact, hold the same value, that it's important to respect the dead. However, the way that they practice this value is different, and it's different in such a way that it makes it almost seem like maybe they have different values, when in fact they don't. They just have different ways of practicing these values. Okay. Now, this being said, there do seem to be actual differences over real moral principles. So, to bring back up our polygamist example from an earlier video, polygamists differ from monogamists over at least one moral principle defining marriage. And this seems to, in fact, be a real disagreement over moral principles. So, it's going to turn out that, in spite of what was said above, when talking about the example of the Chelicians and the Greeks, that we're going to need to grant premise 1 with the understanding that differences over moral principles may not be as necessarily widespread as they seem. So, to turn back to our 3-premise argument in favor of popular relativism, the first premise passes the test. All right, let's consider the second premise. The moral standard that holds for a society is determined by the moral beliefs and practices most widely accepted in that society. Okay. Here is a counter-argument to this premise. Different societies have accepted different views about the Earth's shape, that is, that it's flat or round. This is something that's true. The actual shape of the Earth for a given society is determined by the view about the Earth that is most widely accepted in that society. Sorry, that says "mot" there. It should be most. The actual shape of the Earth for a given society is determined by the view about the Earth that is most widely accepted in that society. So, if we're following these two premises, then we should arrive at the conclusion that the Earth has different shapes for different societies, or that the Earth's shape is relative, right? But unless we can provide a special reason for thinking that premise 2 holds in the case of morality, we have no reason to accept that relativism is true following this argument, right? So what this counterargument shows is that using the same principles that we would have to use in the case of morality leads us to this ridiculous argument. So the ridiculous argument is that from the fact that different societies have accepted different views about the Earth's shape, right? So some people think that it's flat, while others think that it's round. This suggests that the actual shape of the Earth for a given society is determined by the views that that society holds about the Earth that's most widely accepted. So following this reasoning, it should be the case that the Earth actually has different shapes that align with the views of those different societies, right? But that is absurd. The Earth is always round, regardless of what a particular society thinks. So if this argument is going to hold in the shape, in the case of the shape of the Earth, it seems like it should also hold in the case of morality, and so not work. So, relativism has the consequence that no society's, relativism has the consequence that no society's majority could ever be mistaken about something moral. And this is kind of a troubling consequence of relativism, right? So the idea here is that whatever the majority believes is moral is what's moral. So anything falling outside what the majority thinks is immoral. So I don't think that most of us want to accept that. So here, when we revisit our argument, we see that the second premise does not stand up to this criticism. So where are we at with this argument? Now, this analysis only shows that we have no compelling reason in support of relativism. It doesn't show that it's false. In order to show that relativism is false, we need to consider some arguments against relativism. And we're going to do that in the next video.